There we go. Good evening. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Warren Planning Board, Monday, July 24th, 6:30. We have a quorum. Matt Atwood, Ashton Medeiros, Derek Bovine, Tyler Dixon, Fred Massey, Mike Gerhard, and Jim Leffert. So the entire group is here, as well as our newest member, alternate Terry De La Paz, who's here. As an alternate, Terry will sit in the spot of any planning member who is absent for whatever reason and become a voting member. That it's great that Terry's here, because then that puts her in a position where she can make decisions on issues that the full board has heard. So the first step here is our new director's report. Herb, take it away.
Can you hear me okay? So as I promised at the last meeting, I'm going to try to put my director's reports in writing for you folks ahead of time. The interesting thing is that usually I'm trying to coordinate this with the town manager. So sometimes I'm only like halfway through the month by the time I do these things. So there's a little bit of a delay, but I have a couple updates as we go through. In essence, I just wanted to report on the comprehensive plan. We're working with Allison, continuing to work with Allison. She will be here later on tonight. She had a personal issue to take care of. But I've also prepared a calendar, which we'll talk about a little bit later on, to try to move the comprehensive plan forward. Shortly after, we're actually not even shortly, but as we speak, I have another pile on my desk that is trying to make amendments, updates to our land use regulations, specifically zoning and subdivision, as a direct response to the newly enacted housing laws. There are definitely some changes that need to occur that we would like to have on the books before January 1 of 2024. It's only a few months away. So actually that you'll notice when you see the bylaw calendar juxtaposed with the comprehensive plan calendar, it pretty much matches. So there'll be some finesse that we'll have to work at with regard to agenda formulation. But that, unfortunately, we're in the situation where we have to get some stuff in our land use regulations. The question that will still come up is whether you want to take on any other issues as part of that process, besides just essentially coming into compliance with the new housing acts, or those that will take effect starting January 1. That's yet to be decided right now. Because of the expedited schedule, we'll be just looking at trying to come up to speed with those. Applications that basically we have before us, really, as you know, we've talked about Liberty Street School for a little bit with the technical advisory committee meeting, but we technically don't have an application before us at this point. And then I've been dealing with an administrative subdivision. Besides that, it's been quiet on the front with regard to new applications. So there are certainly building permits that are coming in the door, but in terms of new development applications, we haven't had any hit the road since you last met. Central Avenue neighborhood green infrastructure improvements. We did receive an insignificant alteration permit, which is essentially a wetlands permit that will allow that green infrastructure project to move forward. The quick and dirty of that is it's essentially reopening up a drainage ditch area in that neighborhood that's been filled in over time, just dust, leaves, debris, that sort of thing. So it will be an in-house project done by Department of Public Works to get that back to sort of the deepness of the trenching area to help. It won't alleviate as a panacea the flooding that occurs in that area, but it will certainly get it back to what was really envisioned when that storm basin was in there from that standpoint. It's filled in over the years, so there's been excessive flooding due to the lack of maintenance. This past month, we had the town manager had their annual town managers annual hurricane preparedness meeting with department heads. Just a heads up, you're a planning entity, but basically every hurricane season as it comes in, Kate will kind of have a meeting of the department heads to make sure that we're all up to snuff with regard to specific duties and responsibilities should we get a hurricane tropical storm that flows its way up through the bay and nails us unexpectedly. We finished a USDA rural development application to help fund the replacement of a cruiser. That's something that I don't know if you get it or not during the course of the year, but there's a capital budget, capital improvement program that gets developed every single year that goes before the budget process. And as a result, there are some funds that go in to pay for such things as this. But we're also putting in an application to try to get offsetting revenue to fund this particular cruiser. And this is something that if you are involved with or not in terms of the planning process of a capital improvement program, this is sort of the end result of those kinds of things that are put together. It's usually, if you're not familiar with it, it's a town-wide plan for capital infrastructure and such as fleet vehicles and buildings, as for instance. We've put in as part of a tri-town grant application with Bristol and Barrington with regard to planning for some freshwater and habitat quality restoration projects. Essentially what's going to happen in those instances is that if we get the grant funding, there's already been a mapped set of plans for each of the communities that shows the public access points throughout the community, access to the waterways. What we're going to be doing is evaluating each of those public access points using an engineer. We will prioritize the work that needs to be done at each of those with regard to stormwater and the potential of habitat restoration and the coastal habitat restoration. And based on those priorities, there'll be one area picked in each of the 3 communities, and then to move forward with implementing the stormwater and/or habitat restoration. It's sort of like end of road situations. So that's a grant that just went in this past Friday. We met with and are continuing to collaborate with Department of Transportation. Apparently the Department of Transportation has ignored their master stormwater permit requirements from EPA for the last couple of years. EPA has soundly slapped the hand of RIDOT. So RIDOT called us up looking to partnership on maybe some projects that are out there that they could take credit for with regard to impaired waterways, watersheds, that sort of situation. In the Warren area, just think of more the waterways, the Kiki, the Palmer, Barrington rivers, that sort of thing, that RIDOT has kind of ignored their stuff. So they're looking for partnerships to basically any projects that are stormwater based, some of these habitat restoration sorts of things. So even the grant that we just put in on Friday probably can help them to meet their requirements from EPA so they don't get their hands slapped anymore. The question of partnership still has a question of fiscal support behind it. Usually RIDOT projects, if there's something going on, there's usually an 80% federal contribution with 20% being the local match. It's unclear at this point if we came up with some partnership projects, whether we would get some funding for those. Obviously, from my perspective, that's what I'm going to be pushing for. And I think we have a little leverage because of the EPA hand slap. So just a heads up on that one. We've had some further discussion with regard to green development concerning the solar array project at the former landfill. Apparently, they've gotten through some of the RIDEM permitting process, and they would like to be able to start to move forward with implementing some of that project. There's still some questions that legal, the town manager, and especially the Department of Public Works have with regard to current uses at the landfill versus converting some of those existing uses into a solar array. So stay tuned for that one. as we figure out what's going on with regard to that. Generally just trying to work with the various committees that are out there, such as the Housing Trust. And a good example there is just they've been given some ARPA funds by the council, and they're trying to assess the best use of those particular funds and in what format. So I've been trying to at least monitor their type of work as we go through that. I can't remember if I mentioned it at the last meeting, but another grant program that we did that I wrote and was able to receive some funding on is the Municipal Technical Assistance Program grant, where there's no match involved, but we're going to be awarded upwards of $100,000 to do a housing production plan. So if you think of the comprehensive plan and the housing element, establishing the vision, the next step in that would be to say, you know, let's do a more in-depth analysis of our housing stock, figure out what is the true gap between what we need for affordable housing, as for instance, and where we sit today in terms of housing stock, and figure out methods to close the gap between that. And then the idea would be a phase 2 after that, if we can do a phase 2, which is to really have a public engagement process in terms of how we do that true implementation, but at least putting together a housing production plan. Some other communities call them housing allocation plans. This is really just trying to figure out a true analysis of our housing stock, because the state's goal of that, you know, the 10% goal that they tried to throw out there, I think there's a little bit of a vacuum that's out there, and this is intended to put our town in context with what we have, what we really need, and then trying to figure out how to bridge that gap. Still working on the 3 earmarks that we received, which is the $2.2 million for some construction, internal construction with the police department, most specifically in the dispatch area. $2 million earmark from Senator. The previous one was from Senator Reed's office. This one also from Senator Reed, which is consideration of a new rescue facility, and then construction out at the Tuisset area, construction of underground cistern for fire protection that we received through our representative, $825,000 to do that. So we're in the middle of putting our, there's no application required because they're earmarks, but because the funding has to be funneled through a certain federal agency, in this case, that's all going to be funneled through USDA's Rural Development Program, we still at least have to fill out an application. And that's really because the federal agencies have to account for the monies that pass through them. So when they go through their single audit process, they'll have it accounted for appropriately. We just have to sort of fall in line with regard to that. So I'm in the middle of pulling the information together that they need in order to tell us what application you need to have. So a little complexity there, but that's standard operating procedure for any earmark that any organization gets throughout the country. The consultant for, and thank you for the indulgence of your time, by the way, as I go through this stuff, but I'm hoping this stuff you find is important, not only for you as a planning commission, but in terms of what I'm doing for the public as a whole. Bristol County Route 14 One Resiliency Plan project has, at least the consultant has been named by the state, which is Fuss and O'Neill. This is the project that will be funneled through the Office of Statewide Planning, or it's being orchestrated by the Office of Statewide Planning. It is a Bristol County, Barrington, Bristol, Warren joint project from that standpoint. So that's another resiliency project that's going on in the county. Just a heads up, I am going through trying to update your general operating procedures. So it's sort of like the bylaws that you operate under, such as what constitutes a quorum, all those types of things. They haven't been updated for a while, from what I can tell. There have been some statutory changes in the last couple of years, such as what constitutes a quorum for voting on development applications. So that needs to be updated. And then I'm also, because of my experience with my first experience with the Technical Advisory Committee, there's definitely some changes that I would like to recommend that you consider. Right now, I've running them through the town manager. Next will be through the solicitor's office. And then once at least I've seen those Ts crossed, Is dotted, I'll throw them to you as my recommendation for changes, and then you can do with them as you see fit from that standpoint. But I want to make sure that whatever I throw at you has met the test of legal as well as the town manager. And that's all that was in the written report, but there've been a couple things that I've worked on since I had just quickly had a meet and greet with a Barrington planner. So I'm just trying to integrate myself into the community where I possibly can. I've had there's some preliminary discussion. There's a huge grant program that's out there through NOAA. It's their Climate Resiliency Regional Challenge. This is in the neighborhood of $20 to $50 million. RIDEM is taking the lead on doing a big, huge application to NOAA for this. They've actually targeted Warren as one of the foundation pieces to this grant program, leaning on the side of Market to Medicom, as well as some other things from that standpoint. So we've been working with them, Fuss and O'Neill, and some of the other stakeholders that are coming into play. So if this goes through, it will not be Warren taking the lead on something. Warren will be a piece of the puzzle in the whole thing, but certainly will serve as a foundation geographic location from this, and also trying to implement some of the stuff that Warren has planned for quite a few years now. So that's one that I'll keep you definitely in tune with on that one. And then I'm also in the process of trying to establish the town through the CRS, the community rating system, which is a insurance-based program related to floodplains, floodways, trying to get the town involved in that so that I can help get some property, individual property owner insurance bills down. So working on that, and then also working to get our emergency operations plan updated. Now that we had the hazard mitigation plan updated last year or this year, we're going to next work on the emergency operations. I think that's the highlight of what I did over the past month.
All right. We'll talk a bit in the transportation section about the status of the broken bridge too, which is another a larger element within this. The next is the meeting minutes for our last meeting on June 26th. You all received those in the mail. Are there any changes that need to be made to those? Hearing none, I'll make a motion to oh, sorry, Matt.
I don't know if this matters at all. I thought meeting started at 7. I showed up late. I'm not identified as present or absent, so.
Oh, okay, yeah, could you just. Okay, yeah, you may want to.
Showed up at 6:59 p.m.
Chair, election of chair and vice chair.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, I'll make a motion to accept the minutes as they are. Could I have a second? Second, Brett, all in favor? Aye. The 119 Water Street major land development decision was forwarded to us by the town solicitor's office. It was sent out to you folks to take a look at prior to the meeting. You know, I've reviewed it. If there are any concerns or questions regarding this, the next step would be for me to sign this to make it official. But if there are any concerns relative to that.
So my only question then is it typical to include all the testimony throughout the whole process in the decision?
We find it's best practices. It's something that if anticipation of a possible appeal, I think that's something that SHAP looks at and therefore in Superior Court.
So do you think that that makes the decision stronger?
I think a lot of that you see is testimony that was relied. I mean, the transcript was over 200 pages, and what we did was extracted, kind of summarized the testimony which relied on for the decision, both sides. Yes.
I sort of expected, you know, the findings of fact and then the decision, but it was much longer than that, obviously.
We just thought it was in the best interest to do it, this particular project.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I have a question for the, sorry to turn your microphone on, you can turn it back on. So I don't have any concerns about the way it's drafted. I just have a question. Looking at the agenda, item 4 says ratification of written decision. I hear Fred saying he'll sign it. Is there a difference between him signing it and ratification by the board?
No, I think, due to the magnitude of the application, the community's involvement, concerns, the board's time, the complexity of it, I think that unlike past decisions where Fred just signed it, on an average Tuesday, we thought that was important to bring it back to the board to see if there's any major concerns, and he would ask for a vote at some point just to authorize him to execute it as is.
Understood, okay. So with that, then,
That will trigger that PL 20 days.
right, so
Notice.
my only other question was simply, and I don't know the answer, I'm just asking, so because there was a difference in votes, so the board ultimately denied the application. But if members who voted to approve the application or indicated they would have voted to approve the application ratify the decision denying it, does that trigger
No,
any legal procedural issues for?
No, not at all. No.
Yeah.
It does not.
Yeah, so it's essentially acceptance of fact, which is why I
Yeah,
wanted
right,
it to go
exactly
before
what
the
it is.
planning
It
board,
doesn't change.
because
We
it
are not
was,
saying.
Yeah.
rather than just
Exactly.
do the usual
In
six
fact,
times.
once the vote goes through, officially will be recorded and notice of consent, again, I'll trigger that 20-day.
So what is then the timing of the appeal process?
Signs it tonight, recorded tomorrow, notice to the applicant 20 days.
20 days they have to appeal.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? If not, I'd have a vote.
I'll move approval of a ratification of the decision.
Second to
Second.
ratify. Brett, all in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Okay. If only it had been that simple. We're looking at the comprehensive plan. We do have a number of elements in there. What I'd like to do, though, is jump to the recommended schedule for adoption, because this will impact the nature of our discussion moving forward on the comprehensive plan. So that's under schedule comp plan, recommended schedule for adoption that was sent to you folks. Schedule comp plan update June 2023. You're looking for it on your computer. And essentially what we're looking at is between June 26th and January 9th. The process takes place. Herb has given us this based on our regular meetings and special meetings that he's got one in there. We may need to have others, but the point here is to get this process done for a town council vote on January 9th. So with that in mind, it's important for us to move through this process, to hear public comment and concerns. There will be a number of opportunities for people to address this comprehensive plan, including after it goes to statewide planning. So this is not, we don't have to put every element, every piece of information in here. That said, this document is not designed to be a microscope of planning. It's a bit broader. So that's the challenge, balancing the detail with the actions and realistic actions, and also keeping them within the individual elements. For example, and we'll be talking about the historic in a minute. You did receive in your packet a piece that's indicated additional actions relative to historic and cultural preservation. That actually was taken into consideration, those when we did the most recent version of historic cultural. There may be further work done on those, but what we're looking at tonight, for example, in the historic and cultural, is the most recent version of historic and cultural. And we then will move forward with some of the other elements. So is that fairly clear? I mean, you know, we're trying to be, we need to move this forward. I've been working on this comprehensive plan for over 10 years. For a variety of reasons, the town has been stymied in developing this thing. Our goal, we have a very good base and some elements that are near complete drafts. And I want to emphasize that, the drafts. But we do need to move it forward, and we will hold to the schedule that Herb has forwarded, unless something extraordinary happens, and I don't see that, another COVID or Herb leaving or so that was the schedule for adoption. Does anybody have any questions or concerns, on the board about that schedule?
So, but the key date is the October 23rd date when we approve the plan as developed. Is that your reading?
Correct. And the town manager thinks it would be a great idea if this board met with the town council in a joint session prior to formally engaging into that public hearing process to make sure that the two entities are on the same page, that the plan's ready to go to public hearing. Because obviously, once it goes to public hearing, we'd like that process to be as rubber stamped as possible. It's not saying that changes can't be made, but usually when entities get into the public hearing process, they want to have that go smoothly. So if there are any conflicts or finer points that need to be addressed, you would hope that you can get that before you enter into the public hearing process.
Prior to the 23rd, you'll be submitting the drafts to statewide planning for their comments.
I think Allison's been doing some of the, at least like the existing condition elements, as you've been developing them through the process to get some feedback already. Then what will happen is that once we get to the, there is a point where, yes, you can continue to submit stuff to the state. There has to be a formal submittal done upon the adoption by the town council.
By the town council.
The town council effectively will adopt it. Then it gets sent off to the state. It takes the state anywhere from 30 to 60 days, probably 45 to 60 days to get back the full comments from all the state agencies. That's why some elements, they like having the elements go off as early as possible so that they can engage in that process and not have this glut of paper sitting in front of every single state agency. And so if you think about the council adopting it in January 9th, count out another 60 days from there before the state will approve it. And then when the state approves it, it comes back and then it takes effect at that point.
So, but do we then have an opportunity after the statewide planning comments to do our thing, or are we out of the process?
If they have comments that say, that you're deficient here, we would appreciate you, beefing this section up or whatever it is. Yes, you would take that time to do that, but you would decide, as a council and a planning commission, whether you need, if the comments that come back, if you're deficient, you're clearly going to have to do some update in order to meet the requirements of the state. If there are things that they just recommend, but they're not deficiencies, you can make some changes should you choose to, or just let the plan take effect and then say, put those things in a folder so that when you go forward to update the plan or amend the plan, you can do it at a future date. But any deficiencies, you're gonna want to probably clarify, get those things up to date, have the council take action on those things. So again, every time there's a little something that you have to do. There's a meeting that has to go by, and both you and the council only meet once a month. So once something happens, you got to think that just adds 30 days to the process at least.
Just to step back a moment, I did want to note that I'm going to need to sign that Water Street decision tonight. So, as per our ratification, so that should go in the minutes, that it will be signed and forwarded. Which kicks
You
in.
have to find a printer, print it off, sign it.
Yeah, I'm assuming somebody has a copy. All right. Okay, great. We're looking at the Warren, the Historic and Cultural Resources draft. This is the one dated July 17th, 2023, correct, Allison? And you will see the changes and the alterations that were made as a result of our meeting and the input from the public. Are there any concerns, questions from the board? Before we go there, I do want to say there were some really well thought out and good recommendations made to this that we were able to incorporate as a result of public input. So this is certainly been enhanced by the public participation in this. As an example, the certified local government and certified local government grant funding was something that surfaced in the process that none of us were aware of. So, this is one of the beauties of democracy, and particularly of these public hearings. So anyway, I did want to note that because too often I think it doesn't necessarily get as well recognized as it should be. So thank you very much for your input. To go back to the planning board, going through it, any questions, concerns regarding the goals? If not, moving on to the policies. If there isn't, perhaps we can open it to the public for comment. As noted, we have concerns about time, and we have gone over this, I think, at least twice in public hearings. So if you don't see something that was there, and it was presented to us in writing or in the meeting, it was determined that it didn't necessarily fit into this element, or that it was problematic in that it was not fully defined as to why that should be included. I don't want to go back over everything. And the point here is, let's work with what we have in front of us.
So I did have one question. We've taken the word voluntary out of the historic district. Does that imply that it's now mandatory?
I think it is mandatory. The part of it started as voluntary, but I believe there are certain, and Davison, you could probably.
The town, once they enacted the demolition and alteration ordinance, certainly made the alterations and demolition mandatory. They needed to get a approval by the Historic Commission for alterations and permission from the town council for demolitions.
So, but even for alterations, therefore, it's now, or will be,
Correct.
mandatory.
It's somewhat bifurcated. So initially they had a tax incentive program, which town still has. And that's why it was voluntary in nature. You can opt into it, you get tax credit for doing.
I get that.
Okay, the other one then years later came the demolition ordinance, which within that is the alteration language. So either you alter or demolish, and you need legal authority from the commission or the town council to do the work.
And that's why Ben worked on that piece to put
Correct.
the demolition, the cart, the horse before the cart in this case, because prior to that, people were looking at the incentive without going to the fact that they had to abide by certain rules. So that was
Thank
the
you.
point of that. Davison?
Just one note.
Sure.
District. Should be removed as well, because the commission gets asked pretty often, even on any matter related to the historic resources in the townwide. So like the tree commission or the conservation commission or whatever, should just be the historic commission. We get asked things like, the bridges that they're repairing, quite bad, right? We had to provide an advisory opinion to DOT about the historical aspect of those bridges, those are outside of this. Et cetera, so anytime DOT, broken bridge or whatever.
Yep.
So, and going forward, if we do all this, if the town does expand the existing historic district, or in fact, create other historic districts. We felt that leaving that wording and being snow would not be accurate.
So, let me, you're referring, we're out of the goals into the policies or? Yeah, okay. And then the first one, undertake a review of existing historic district boundary, or that doesn't seem to me, that's not what you're,
No, the second,
which is,
to remove the word voluntary.
But you're asking to remove those, the.
Oh,
national
so-
District from.
recommended amendments to local
the
historic.
name-
District, well,
Which
In
makes
the name of
sense,
the commission.
the name of. Yes.
which makes sense if we are saying that, we could have like a voluntary opt-in for properties outside, so we would need somebody to kind of vet that, which would make sense.
Well, I don't know what's involved legally with that. I mean, we didn't give it the name.
Right.
We're just going with what it's called.
Yeah, I don't know that we can.
You can't unilaterally. it's gonna-
Change the name.
Ordinance change, right?
Right.
Because all that language, everything the voluntary commission is within, the law that's current on it now.
So we're,
That was required amendment.
so taking the voluntary out's already changing the amendment, so if we're gonna change it, it's time to do it, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, we say, responsible party, historic commission. So, in the responsible party element. So, I think we could, outside of this comprehensive plan, ask for a change to the name. Is that, which we could then implement within the comprehensive plan? I mean, I understand what Davison's asking for, but I think that would take an action by the town council rather than the planning board.
Yeah, all of this would just be a recommendation for the council. Correct.
Yeah,
So
Yeah,
we
you
would
almost-
then we have to add a sentence that says. Encourage the town to change the name of the historic district commission to the historic. Commission.
We had a sentence in there. Said revise the name to Warren Historic Commission.
yeah. I mean, I don't see a problem with that.
Yeah, I can just tweak that second
Okay.
implementation action
Great.
that, actually, that doesn't have a.
All right, that
Uh,
makes perfect sense.
that's where it speaks to changing the name, so we can just expand.
Okay.
That,
Are we taking action on this? Are we suggesting this needs to be sent to the state? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, the intent would be to move this along and then move to the next element. So,
yeah, so several elements have already gone to the state. That was a while ago. We had the comments returned.
you know,
the
we-
rest of
this
those.
one-
Now, I'm hoping after tonight's meeting that we can
Or-
send several more right away so that they can start reviewing, getting comments back while we finalize the drafts of the remaining elements. Yeah.
We don't take a vote on it. We just
No,
instruct Allison to send it to him.
yeah. I mean, as is. I would assume that actually we would take a vote. So. On the draft.
I think when you're ready with a draft, Allison knows that if you've got the general
Good.
consensus on something, she can shoot it off to get some comments. Yeah. If you want to act, you can, but I think you can operate on general consensus on that.
Anything else?
Do you want him to speak at the mic?
Second.
Yeah, it's, you mind,
Yeah,
so we can hear
Is that better?
Yes.
Excuse me, the third action under policy 1, we would just eliminate the word significant because that becomes very subjective. So it would just be property.
AHC3 on page 2.
Yes,
Cultural significance, is that the word? Is that what you're referring to?
yes, because that word is so subjective and it's not defined anywhere else within the town.
So explore establishing new historic districts to preserve other areas of Warren of special historic and cultural significance.
Oh, I'm
That's
sorry, I'm on number 4, excuse me, because they've been renumbered in 2 different drafts. So I was talking about number 4.
Significant property.
In number 3, that word should
Oh,
stay
okay.
significant.
property owners of historically significant, so
Yes,
it'd just be historic properties?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Seems
Okay.
reasonable.
We, let's see.
If anybody has any objections to this,
Yep, please.
yep,
Right,
and
I
if
mean,
not, we'll just go with
anytime
it.
there's a defined term, we shouldn't be modifying a defined term with something like an adjective like significant or something like if. that's
Yeah, I
not-
mean, to me, that's, there's, it's one thing if it's a historic district commission, but
Right.
historically significant is.
Yeah, who determines that? It's,
Well, yeah, I mean-
it's very
We do.
vague. Yeah, it's not. Under AHC 8,
Yeah.
we had just added, it's where it says enact an ordinance and incentives for the protection of stone walls.
Sure.
Under,
Anybody?
For that one, what kind of incentives and how are we gonna pay for it?
that's to be worked out, but the point of
we
this
can't-
is to
So we can't
say
do
that
that unless we have,
we want to have incentives, not just an ordinance. In other words, the carrot and the stick, so to speak.
if we put it in there though, then people are gonna come for incentives, and if we don't have the money, we won't be able to provide the incentives.
Herb's probably,
I would say seek out or consider incentives. Yeah, because we don't have it.
yeah,
And
yeah, it's something,
To Ashley's point, people would say,
it would be new.
where's the incentive?
Yeah.
Where are the carrots?
Free Dell's lemonade. Under AHC 9. You had asked, there was the question there, should this be eliminated? And during our process, we did eliminate that whole policy or that whole action item. Because it just,
Would there,
it wasn't.
would there be a reason not to extend the form-based code to the historic district?
Well, I don't even know if it's been implemented for the Medicom area.
No, it hasn't been implemented, but it was something that had been discussed a while back when,
It came out of that Medicom, market to
yeah,
Medicom.
market to medical
concept.
plan, the form-based code. It's in rough draft form, but if that were to be implemented and successful, you may want to consider implementing it in other
Yeah.
areas of town. So that's what that's.
I think that's a good
suggesting.
idea.
Yeah, so I would
Yeah.
take out the word eliminate.
Yeah, I like it.
Okay,
Again, under AHC 11, the word significant.
What's that?
yeah, significant physical alterations to town.
Is problematic. And then,
I agree. I think when you put in significant, it leaves too much wiggle room for somebody to say. it is or
Uh,
isn't.
the way it's laid out here, I would say that and this is just trying to be clear as to which policies relate to which action items, would be 11, 12, 13, and 15 should be under number 1. And basically only 14 and 16 relate to policy number 3.
And I'm,
Yeah, could you restate that? 12?
so PHC 1 as the policy
Yes, for
would
number
have
C12.
those numbers again?
11, 12, 13, and 15.
Oh, yeah,
Right?
okay. That makes sense, Allison? You see what,
So only 14 and 16 currently relate to policy 3,
Well, I don't know.
right?
Support efforts to identify, recognize, and share and celebrate history. The history and heritage of Warren. We're talking about
Yeah, that's,
number 12 and 13 speak to inventories and applications to the National Register. That's identifying, recognizing historic resources. So I
Okay.
don't see why it doesn't
All
fit
right.
there. But
and then,
more versus, I mean, the National Register doesn't protect or
Yeah,
preserve
I-
historic structures. It's recognition.
Yeah,
It's
I
an
think you wanna
inventory. There's
identify
no
those.
protection.
okay. And also for clarification, we had thought that the Roger Williams study that was done in 2011 which is listed there under AHC 12, did include an inventory of resources, and it turns out it really didn't. And that's why we had put in our recommendations under the list that we provided of inventorying Warren's historic resources, because it really, other than the 74 survey by the state, it really hasn't been done to as thorough as a degree as it should
well, we
be.
can include that in the appendix, correct? The Roger Williams,
The whole study, the whole, that
Yeah, and I think it is already, but
in your existing comprehensive plan?
no,
What do you
because
mean
it didn't
it's in?
exist back then, but it was recommended to be included as an appendix to this one. But like I say, it doesn't really include an inventory. So
What do you mean? It doesn't have like. What do you mean? What do you mean it
it's a
doesn't-
plan. It's got a lot of policy recommendations in it, but there's really no inventory, like, you know, how many buildings or, structures, sites, farms, stone walls, anything.
well, I think if you utilize as a resource and update as needed, I mean, this is something that we've talked about that we'd like to see, the historic groups in Warren engage in as a cooperative effort to identify those places. For example, the 2 houses on Water Street, they should have been identified in an inventory, it's like, that's a worthy goal
Right.
for historic groups. Planning board's not gonna do it,
No, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the planning board has to do it. It just means that it needs to be done. So.
Yeah, no, and I agree, I think,
I mean, I recall this conversation, there was an action item about preparing an inventory, and I thought the conversation was, well, we actually already have a good inventory already existing. It may just need some updating. So we amended the action item to say what it says now, but
That's
now.
that's my memory. That's-
Yeah, so now we don't have a good inventory, so that. needs
Why
to
why don't we
be-
just look at it?
I mean-
Let's see it.
Yeah, I'll take a look at it. I'll see how extensive, if there is not an inventory. the
clearly
inventory,
there's-
we
I
will-
mean, does anyone have it right here? Great.
Because if you did, if it doesn't have an inventory in that particular document,
Yeah.
you could end with like inventory.
Well, that
And
was,
then-
that
and
was
then
the,
we just-
that was the policy that we suggested, was to use the verb inventory, because it really.
yeah, I mean, I think utilize as a resource and update as needed Warren's comprehensive historic and cultural resources inventory. I mean, maybe you take out prepared by Roger Williams University because that could be too limiting. I mean, it might.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is. Yeah.
Okay, so let's do
But I
that.
mean, it is a good resource for other things.
Right,
And it's
Um,
listed, I think we have it under the resources.
Okay.
So it's referenced there, that plan.
okay,
I'll take
Okay.
a look at it, but yeah, I'll.
Thank you.
If
All right.
you feel like, yeah, we need,
Yeah.
if Warren needs an
Uh,
update.
Yeah, we do need-
inventory, Then we'll definitely include that as an action.
Moving on to policy 5. Under number 22, we had eliminated that TIF comment at the end there, tax incentive financing, increment financing. Because again, we looked into that TIF thing. It's not going to happen here. It's a,
Oh, I see. So
Very-
you're saying that the funding was anticipated to come from the Medicott
Right.
Avenue redevelopment, so.
right. So that
is,
policy
You know,
is-
that may or may not happen.
that's like
So we don't want to limit it to
3
that.
years old, right? So you know, you can just put a period after historic buildings, really,
Okay.
to set up a revolving fund.
As
Uh,
opposed to
number
saying,
22.
for example, the TIF, because that's, you know, at this point,
Yeah.
All right.
Not
Is it
real.
not, is it off the table? Like, I mean, can it not be referenced as a possibility any longer?
yeah, I guess
mean-
because it's saying, for example, it's just, I mean, it might,
There's so many different ways that you could set up a revolving fund. I
Right,
mean, if
that
you
it-
wanted to start listing different options of different available methods, that's probably the least likely.
it could
one
be,
to
you know,
happen.
a tax on sales, you know, like the kind of little Compton thing for.
Right,
land.
which they mentioned under number 24. And we had also, it seemed like policy number 5 and policy number 6 were pretty much redundant. And so we had eliminated policy number 6 and just moved up the action items under policy 5.
Any reason to keep that in? They are similar.
And even,
Yeah,
even action item number 22 and number 23 are fairly redundant. So those could be probably combined.
22 and 23.
Yep.
So one is saying.
Well, I
that we're
think the
gonna
facade
send-
improvement loan, that is something that
Specific.
has been implemented. So
One
I'd
specific.
like to keep that as,
Okay.
And it's different funding streams, so it's different. It could be grant programs and things like that, like
Yeah,
federal funded.
Yeah, and we
so-
did scratch Main Street area because there's lots of areas in town that have storefront, need for storefront improvements.
but I don't see a problem with combining.
But keeping them separate.
C5 and
5 and 6. And then so we had created a new number 6 because,
So on ACC, the 23, we,
Yep.
I think the goal is, because we only have 10 years on this, you want the facade improvement and loan, you do want to condense to an area so that there's max impact
Yep.
for the town, and that's why it was Main Street, because we wanted, that is kind of the visual of the town. So
target.
by expanding it, you're gonna have one here, one there, and it's not gonna have as significant impact over the course of 10 years.
Hopefully it'll be bigger than that.
Because that's, the comprehensive plans are supposed to be redone every 10, correct?
And
maybe what if we say prioritize, so not saying, like, reword it? If you want to say like that's the priority area, but not
For which,
the Main Street, like we had stricken Main Street area property.
yeah, I think historic properties, I mean, the problem with Main Street is that some of the facade work was done on Child Street, it was done on Water Street. I mean, there was the work that's been done so far is, you know, minimal, I think, on Main Street and probably more extensively on some of the side streets.
yeah, but I mean, that was all from the ARPA money. We got $250,000. So we gave out 10,
Right.
$25,000 grants, and I don't think they were limited to Main Street. It was
Yeah.
just downtown in the historic district, I think.
Yeah,
So
and the COVID fund money's gone, so.
anyway,
we won't be
one of the
seeing
things,
those.
none of the 5 policies reflected anything about cultural. Resources in terms of the arts maybe, or whatever. So we actually created a new policy 6.
That's actually a separate element within the plan, so like the cultural, so there's the historic, and then isn't there another section, Allison?
No,
for
this
cultural?
is historic and cultural.
Historic and cultural.
This one's historic and cultural.
We do get into culture and arts in the economic development
Yep,
element.
yep.
There's some content there, not that it can't be in here as well,
Yep.
but there is some.
Well,
So what you-
it's the title, it was just very simply promote the arts as an economic and cultural driver. I mean, it's kind of umbrella. Just to get it
I
in
think we
there,
have that in economic development element.
just to get it in there, because this is the
Yeah.
cultural resources section, so. So that was all in terms of like sort of corrections with the actual draft, the working draft. But then, if you don't mind, going back to that list of actions that we had submitted. Even if, you don't think they're appropriate or whatever, it'd be good to just get some feedback to see, well, how do we either include these or the reasons why we don't include them, maybe. At
Yeah,
least
I mean,
as briefly as possible.
yeah, I mean, that's the problem. I don't think that it could necessarily, I mean, I think. For instance, policy 3, establish a paid position to promote the town's municipal, natural, historic and cultural resources. It's just too broad. I mean, it's not.
Requires
There-
funding and,
Yeah, and there are a number of things that were there that we just, investigate temporary storm protection barriers and other measures for
That's-
historic property. That's done
that's-
somewhere else. So.
No, it's in here. That's in here.
But again, it's the salt marsh migration along Warren Shores. I
That
mean,
should be
that's
another-
not
that's a-
historic or cultural.
No, and we
So,
say that.
there were a lot of things in there that felt that like they were outside the scope of this particular, not that they aren't good ideas, but that they were outside the scope of this historic and cultural element. And, we had to pick and choose.
Yeah.
So,
Um,
and for instance, document and protect Poconoket and other archaeological sites when identified through oral history or excavation. I mean, that is something that the state handles. And also, I know that there are issues between the Poconokets and the Narragansetts relative to, so, we don't want to put the comprehensive plan in the middle of,
okay. I don't know
So, I
if
mean,
that can be, if that can be.
we did look
simplified.
at it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But-
Yeah, no, I'm just, because there was a lot of, focus and input from people that are, in the field that we felt, at least we should see what the discussion was, even just on a cursory level.
Yeah, I mean, it was Allison, Herb, and I went over it.
I reviewed it.
We had, the full planning board got this and went over it. And it's just, we're trying to zero in as much as possible. And again, it's that balance, identify and protect historic and significant trees. Absolutely a great idea, but I think more, in the
Natural
natural
resources.
resources
Yeah,
section.
That's
So,
fine.
Was
The
what we looked
wayfinding.
for was, where
Meat
is
and
this?
bones.
Where does it appear somewhere else? And
Yep.
if it makes sense to include it, to reinforce it, because we do that in some cases,
Yep.
on some of the elements, so.
Yeah,
No, because yeah, I think, well, we haven't. I mean, it's, because I think, there's only so much time that we have. I mean, one of the things, and this was the point really behind the schedule. We're trying to take in as much as we can and do it in a timely fashion. On the other hand, I don't want to be in a position where we're defending, going through yet another iteration of it. So,
And I do feel
it's
like,
not dead.
I
at
do
this-
feel like a lot of this that isn't in this is in another section of the plan. And so just because it's not under a cultural historic resource doesn't mean it's not going to be a guideline under the environmental section or the economic development, traffic, things like that. So
I mean, I appreciate what you're saying, Carrie. It's just, I think, we have had a lot of give and take and we're trying to move it forward expeditiously, but at the same time, being sensitive to what's happening. And, it's a volunteer board. The EPA is paid, So I can tell you, I and most of the members of the board spend many hours on this.
Yep.
And
well,
it's,
I think a lot of these too can be implemented, even not even being in the comprehensive plan.
yeah, but also, I'm not saying forget about
Oh, no.
them,
Oh, we won't.
Yeah, so again, we're gonna have more, and once the town councils looked at it, they're gonna have some concerns too. We're also trying to be proactive in terms of, as the town council,
Yeah.
for instance, a position, we look at something like that and go, wow, I can just see them saying, forget about it, and we don't want to do that. But again, you will have another crack at it.
Yeah,
I would say, I would say a lot has been incorporated, a lot, maybe you didn't see an historic element, this final draft, because it's incorporated into other elements, like wayfinding
Yep.
is in the transportation element.
okay,
So I would say it's just maybe a small handful that weren't incorporated, and again, not because they're not good ideas, but maybe they weren't applicable to the comprehensive plan, or a couple might have been budget items,
Yeah.
or like a request to the town council, if it's, a budget request versus being in the comprehensive plan. And, but I could make a short list of what maybe isn't referenced, just the few that aren't appearing, if you
Yep.
want to kind of see those and
Yeah, because
make a case if you
Allison
feel
did a very
strongly,
good
like,
job.
if there are some that aren't included and you feel strongly that you want to.
yeah,
include
I mean,
them.
looking through them all, honestly, it's probably maybe the last one or the last one before, the last one in policy 5. We did come up with this idea of putting some focus on the Parker Mill neighborhood, which has never had 1 ounce of focus in 40 years that I've lived here. And, we spent a lot of time and money and focus on Water Street and Main Street. And that neighborhood over there is, something that seems like everybody drives through with their blinders on and just doesn't even want to think about it because it's probably too much to think about. But in the scheme of things, that neighborhood has some pretty amazing potential to be revitalized. The mill being a focal point with some potential residential development. Even today, I was contacted by somebody who's interested in the property on the corner there with the 4 historic buildings about restoring those. So there's might be a little fire station there that comes up for sale and so forth and so on, and storefront money. And
I mean, I couldn't agree with you. I mean, that is it's a terrible area. It's, like the worst welcome mat you've ever seen.
yeah, and if you live there, it's probably even worse. You got people
so-
driving 50 miles an hour right
But
across
again, I
the front
think,
door.
I'm not sure that I see that as a historic area as much as a redevelopment area. I mean, that's an area that, it's not, there's a historic house that's for sale actually in
Yeah.
Child Street right on the corner there, but
That's what I'm
for
talking
the
about.
most part, those areas, those are tenements that have been allowed to go and, car body shops.
Yeah.
So I think
So
that.
actually, so my personal notes here say land use element,
That's
so
right.
I noted it for
Yep.
inclusion there,
Yeah, because
Yeah.
so not that.
going forward, if we do try to seek funding for that neighborhood, it would be nice.
I mean, I would love to see it because.
There's some
it's,
mention in
you
the
know,
plan for it that, it gives it some standing,
Yeah, and I think, Alice and I had talked about that, and that is,
Okay.
so.
Yeah, I
Great.
think there's areas in traffic that could, in the traffic plan that we could probably address this. There's areas in economic development that could address this as well. And so I think just making sure that we consider that area as we're developing and maybe mentioning it.
Yeah, it would take
as a
some
target
DOT
within.
coordination and other things.
Even though the market to Medicom is technically inclusive of it. People just think Medicom and not going all the way through that corridor there.
Yeah, well, we talked about that for the fact that that needs to be expanded down 136 to,
Right.
I mean, Medicom Avenue goes down by where the Tillotson was, and, there's a lot there that's more than just the Ocean State job lot.
Right.
Okay,
Okay.
There was
thank-
one final thing, the Century Farms, that one I was looking online, I couldn't find too much local information, I saw programs in other.
Yeah, I had
states,
never
but-
heard of it. One of our members brought that up. She knew about it from somewhere. And it sounded like something that,
that what would be helpful there is get some information, give it to us so we
Yep.
have a better sense, because
Yeah.
I mean.
and again, it's something that we can do without, it doesn't have to be in the
I mean,
comprehensive plan.
theoretically, it's a great idea, but it's,
You know.
Of course.
what is it?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
I
it
didn't
seemed
even
like
know
a,
myself.
volunteer group, that would be a good project
Yep.
for, but and I have in my notes here about maybe.
Yeah.
In the economic development, there's a lot of focus on agriculture, that's
Cool.
where the state requirements, so I was thinking something could go there, but I
Yep.
couldn't find enough like information as far as through the state.
Yeah, I mean,
some
it's something, Warren,
background.
it's, it's a big part of Warren's heritage and it'd be nice to acknowledge those people that are still on their land farming to this day after, 100 years or more. So,
Information about Warren Farms, it is in the Warren 50 book, which is also available online through the Preservation Society website.
Okay.
So there's a whole agriculture section, which as of the 90s talked about historic farms.
If you could send us that link, that would be helpful. Very nice.
So this program is Department of Agriculture. Many states have implemented. When I pulled up their website, there was no implementation.
That was what happened. Right. I saw it. It was a federal program. Other states had it. I didn't see it.
So again,
in Rhode
I'd
Island.
say to move forward with this, you can help us.
yeah,
Surface those links, send them in to us, and that can be incorporated, because it's, we want to preserve the agriculture, and I think if you're able to recognize the folks who've been there on those farms, it gives them greater reason to keep the farm as opposed to develop it, and I hear you.
Yes.
okay. Thank you for your
Okay.
time.
Thanks very much.
you.
We can simply, at this point, make a motion to accept this draft, direct Allison to make the modifications that we talked about here, and then submit it to statewide planning. So I'd make that motion. Second, Brett, all in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Okay. Economic development is the next one.
I have a lot.
This one is not yet in its,
So yeah, we had last month. You had seen kind of some rough content starting to form. This was probably, I guess, the last element to start a draft for. So there was some content, and then we started getting some initial discussion about it. Probably, part of the conversation from last month meeting was reaching out to economic development, local professional partner organizations and stakeholders to get their input on the element. So you don't have before you like a new draft version yet. We're gonna seek some additional input from the community to help create more content for
Ms.
that element.
how would you recommend going about that?
Well, there's a few ways. I started, we could do a survey, we could have a meeting, a workshop, we could contact them one-on-one, kind of like a phone call. There's a bunch of different ways.
Mis- Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
So the Economic Development Board is meeting Wednesday. I'll be at that meeting, and I have sent to Derek as well as the members the current version of that. So hopefully I can solicit some input from them, at least to take another meeting, and because it's not advertised in their agenda right now, but at least give them the more oomph to
Yeah,
give us some
okay.
comment. Also, Ashley's given me a preliminary list of some names to reach out to, and Allison and I have talked about some notes. We've been trading some notes back and forth in terms of that. Also, I've been invited to participate in the chamber. So that then their next meeting is August 17th. And again, they're looking for an update. And I could throw the economic development chapter at them as well.
Okay, great. I think that makes sense. I mean, ideally, I'd like, the next time we have it in front of us to have it in the same format as the
Yeah.
rest of the elements.
I'm working,
And,
yeah, halfway
be
there.
dealing with that. And also I'd recommend that, I always find that if there's something in front of people that they can react to, as opposed to making up out of their heads, it's, streamlines the process. So,
I think what I would like to see even before it goes to anybody is looking more at data. And so there's so much workforce data and so many statistics, and making sure that what we're saying in here is relevant to the businesses. And so we've been talking a lot about agricultural businesses. There are 8. 5 + 3, 8 agricultural businesses registered in Warren. That's it. And so to have a whole, and so I really think we need to look at what are the straits of Warren and what is in here. And so, construction is the number one business being run out of Warren. 9% of businesses registered by the Secretary of State in Warren are construction. 62% are professional, scientific and technical, or 8% are professional, scientific and technical. Manufacturing is at 7%, accommodations and food services at 5%, retail trades also at 5%. And so just making sure that we know what are post-COVID, the businesses that are doing well here, and really focusing and making sure that we are looking at a well-rounded and not just focusing on these small things that are statistically insignificant.
Well, would you be willing to work with Allison on this? I mean, I think that makes sense if you could honcho this, Ashley,
Yes.
because you're, well-versed in it. So that makes sense to.
Yeah. The data, so there was a table that from, I'm sure the Department of Labor and Training, so the data you were just providing, is that?
So the data I
different from-
provided was the total registered businesses with the Secretary of State.
Okay.
Now,
so
it's not 100% because if you're a sole prop or a general partnership, you don't have to register with the Secretary of State, but for the more impactful, so when you're talking about construction, manufacturing and scientific, they're typically not sole proprietors and are registered as an LLC or a corporation. And so I think just really understanding and then knowing where those paid, so like supporting the growth of industries that produce livable wages and higher paying jobs, and putting that as one of the goals. And I also think within the economic development is looking at different areas and inventorying development sites and available real estate, highlighting key aspects, including the zoning to make business retention, expansion, attraction a viable option for the town. Because as we talked about, that Market Street is zoned right now agricultural something that doesn't make any sense. But again, we have only 8 registered agricultural businesses in the entire town. And so, however, there are larger companies like TPI that are functioning there, who is one of the largest companies in Warren and making composites for the world. And so I think understanding what is going to drive economic development and achieve economic development as a whole, and looking at that tax base. And I think a lot of the things that we talk about by increasing the amount of businesses within the town in certain areas and focusing on that, that's how you increase your tax base. And that's how you're able to implement these other strategies and put incentives and things, because you're generating more tax income for a town.
So what is the trade-off between
Can you come up? Sorry.
So what is the trade-off between encouraging business development versus looking at the interests of residents and other businesses in the area that have cultural significance? In other words, when I hear, let's encourage businesses develop, I think of Route 6 and Seekonk, and nobody wants to live near that. So what is the trade-off there between, I'm all for encouraging businesses and even small businesses to thrive in Warren. But I don't think that simply the tax rolls or the number of businesses registered needs to be the only metric that we're going to judge how we want to build out a comprehensive plan. Like there are only 8 farms or 7 farms in Warren, but Fergus Farm is one of them. And I know everybody goes to the Giant Pumpkin Festival. So there's cultural significance for some of these businesses that I think we need to support, encourage, and weigh against, who do we want at that property? Do you want Fergus Farm there, or do we want Home Depot?
And so what you do is that's what economic development is. It's looking at areas of the town that should be developed and identifying sites that are developable so that when people do come to the town and look to develop, they're developing in the areas that aren't impacting things like that. So you're kind of looking at the areas and the sites that make sense to develop or redevelop into these. And it's scalable for the town. So no, a Home Depot might not make sense here, but the businesses that are thriving are these small manufacturers, and looking at businesses that you could bring in, because the other metric is the fact that our town's median wage is barely a livable wage in Rhode Island. And so being able to create jobs in manufacturing and scientific and technology companies so that people can live and work here in the town, that again and even when you increase that tax base, you're able to then take that tax and put it into historic preservation and saving things that you want to save. But where we are right now, we're dollar for dollar. We can't even get our recycling picked up every week because it's so expensive. And so thinking about how we want to see development and how we want to build and balance is really the only way. But adding more homes doesn't increase the tax base all that much.
And I think as well, that this is the comprehensive plan, so it has to fit within those things that make up the unique character and the quality of life that we all enjoy. You know, the intent, no element takes precedence over another one. They have to work together. So, you know, to me, open space and agriculture is just as important as economic development, but all of them are limited. You know, there's this concept that, you know, you always have to grow. Well, you can't. There's only so much land that can be developed or redeveloped, and that's really was the market to Metacom concept, was focused on that kind of redevelopment idea. But you know, you don't want to do that at the expense of something like Fair Oaks Farm. I mean, that's and frankly, that was one of the things that when we had one of the comprehensive permits, there was this, you know, the two really large buildings that were proposed for right next door to Fair Oaks Farm, you know, for, you know, ostensibly affordable housing. And, you know, that's the kind of thing that we're hoping a comprehensive plan can prevent in the future, that you don't want it, as Ashley said, in the wrong places, you know, for sure. So, you know, but we appreciate your concern, and that needs to be said, and it needs to be said every time at this meeting, and particularly in front of the town council. You know, they need to hear it.
'Cause this is what.
You want to move to transportation now, or?
Yeah, we can.
Thanks.
Thank you. But again, thanks, Ashley, and I think if, you know,
If
we
you want to
can,
email me your comments, if you have
Okay,
written
yeah,
I can
comments
do that.
and the data you have, and I
That
can
would be excellent.
incorporate that
Sure.
for the board. Okay, thank you.
again, with transportation here, we have a much more buttoned down approach to this. I know I've seen this before. Has anybody else here seen this? The transportation element? Have
We
looked
did it
at
one or
this?
two meetings ago. the
Yeah, I mean, I'm
transportation
pretty
element.
sure we,
Yeah,
because we talked, you know, and this looks familiar to me, but I don't know. One of the things that we noted here, and I've been talking with Herb about, and also Allison, is the broken bridge that is going to be done. I'm assuming in the fall. I mean, are they looking for that, or? Because the issue there is we got the money for Safe to Schools, a grant, and it makes sense to have this bridge, but now we've got to connect the bridge to the rest of the bike path. And what we're recommending in here is connecting it to Libby Lane to go to Franklin Street, because that's where the light is across Metacom Avenue, which makes all the sense in the world, because it's probably the safest place to make the cross, because you already have a light there. Roger Williams Universities came up with a bridge. They came up with an underground tunnel, you know, all of which are millions and millions of dollars to do. The previous town planner had talked about Vernon Street, but again, that would require another light, and it would also mean people, you know, children on Metacom Avenue. If Metacom does go to the 3-lane road that we're recommending in here, that could help. But right now, that bridge is going to be done in the fall, and people need to get from East Warren to West Warren and vice versa. You know, that's the whole point behind that bridge. So this is a key part of the intermodal transportation that's going to exist. I mean, particularly for folks who live in East Warren, to get into town, you know, if you just put the bridge over the side and you have to come out that neighborhood, you're on the absolute worst part of Child Street that has no shoulder whatsoever. So it's essential that this safe route be established soon. You know, this actually predates the comprehensive plan, because we need this like tomorrow.
We're lucky in that, I think, there's an easement all the way from the bridge to Metacom. Starting from,
To Parker Mills. Yeah.
have to be in property acquisition.
Right. But it is a matter of paving it and making it safe.
So that according to the RIDOT webpage on this particular project, they're still on target for finishing construction this year.
Yeah, so that, maybe the fall, it could be coming out at the same time as the comprehensive plan.
Right, but they are doing that. Basically, the most recent update was they plan to offload some materials as needed along both east and the west sides of the bridge, near the bike path, and then they're going to do some grading before they're able to install the sheet pile retaining wall. And then they're continuing with their survey work and sidewalk construction along Child Street and Hugh Cole Road.
Okay, anything else in here that struck anybody? We did talk about finding not only signage, but also an app that could be used for parking in the town. That would be easily accessible to people coming in.
Is there anything in that section about the Medicom Rotary?
No, I mean, that's the first,
The Parker Mill area neighborhood that you were referencing in the, so,
That
yeah.
what we consider a rotary is really,
oh, yeah.
Big loop.
Yeah. More of an oblong.
It's an oblong.
Can add that as far as
Well,
having a traffic engineer
We had some
explore.
pretty sharp people suggest that, we could potentially eliminate 2 lights. And really make it more of a streamlined rotary so that there's never any traffic back up in any direction. That's a fascinating concept. We obviously take engineers, DOTs on it. But we wanted it to at least get mentioned with the comp plan. So again, it gets, some footing and some standing.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Makes sense.
There is one section of that rotary which goes Medicom Ave north of Child Street, as you're heading north, going by Medicom Kitchen, Barrella's. They did bring it down to 1 lane,
Right,
and if they did that throughout, which would dovetail with the effort to make the rest of Medicom 1 lane in each direction.
right.
It would make much more sense, it'd be more streamlined, you wouldn't have the traffic backups. And the quality of life conceivably could improve, we might be able to have room to plant trees, or maybe have bike lanes, or room to put snow, or in the winter, or whatever.
Well, we had talked about that bike lane, if you made Medicom a 2 lanes, which it makes sense because it's 2 lanes in Bristol, so it would be a continuation of that.
Just make that whole neighborhood more livable for people who do have to live there. Living in the middle of the highway, so.
It is a state road, so I wonder if the language could be encouraging DOT because it's their responsibility. So something like they took on that whole Newport Bridge realignment project. So this seems like something that maybe working with DOT to figure out a new plan, because it should be on them, because it is a terrible. I don't know who developed
Okay.
it, but it needs to
I'll
be
add it in.
rethought.
I'll add an action item on
Yeah,
this,
because we
and
did
we'll
include this, I mean, we
Right.
recognized the fact that we needed DOT to, agree to the 3 lanes, because it is a state road, so. And that does fit under policy number 1, which is, green and complete streets approach to planning, designing, building, maintaining roads that enable safe access for all users for all modes. I mean, that certainly makes sense. So let's add in that, the Medicom to Child Street oblong.
And because when you come out of that, on the north end of it, it's back to 2 lanes. So.
Yeah, that's kind of baffling how that stuff happens, but
Thank you.
thank you. Okay, anything else, folks? If not, we'll make that change, to incorporate that. That's the right place for it.
Then we're gonna send that off to,
Yeah, statewide planning, that looks to me like, that's a go. And we've spent many hours on Mark Dominicum, so.
Yes.
You don't want to spend any more time? I've seen it in my dreams.
We
Okay,
don't currently, I do want to mention, we don't currently have anything regarding the harbor and the transportation element, so that's.
I'm sorry, the what?
Harbor, so they have. Like, I don't know if you want any water discussion, water.
Well, the harbor management plan is before the CRMC right now, so it doesn't
Do you
exist.
have- I couldn't get a digital, like, I requested a copy of,
I can get it.
okay.
Yeah, I don't,
You have a hard copy of it. Masters service out there publicly before it gets done in the review process.
because it already went through one iteration and
Okay.
it was rife with errors. And so
So-
they had to rewrite it and it's still got issues and I don't want to see it in the planning board until CRMC has looked at it because it was very poorly done. I mean, there's no,
So there's requirement, that's why I have it highlighted in here, large scale transportation facilities that exist within the community, if any, such as airports, ports and harbors. Have been described and assessed, so right now there's no content, so I just want to maybe pull some content from the harbor management plan.
Sort of, yes.
Yeah.
My thinking is that maybe general, general language that we pull from that, but in terms of other concepts, some kind of ferry service that runs out, or I know I'm talking out of turn, but just,
Mhm.
those are the kind of concepts that may not be in that. I think that, are things like that.
no, it's really more about, the docks and in there, which are, fairly limited in terms of, it's not large scale.
Yeah.
For
it's
example,
more
so
rec-
it's more important
recreational.
fuels, but that stuff does need to be into the comprehensive plan. I mean, that harbor management plan, if it, is done professionally, should appear in this. So, but that'll have to, we have to put that on hold until it comes back from CRMC. Okay,
Just check the calendar.
All right, just want to make sure we. cover
yeah, I mean, I can
everything
give you,
that
I've
state-
looked at it in detail and I can give you some thoughts on that as well.
The other thing I had, like high crash intersection data, like anything like that from the
Any
police
what?
department, high crash, intersections, data like that, any other road. Roads that are of concern and,
Right.
so we did seek input, maybe the police department hasn't provided any comments yet on this.
Yeah, I've seen some, recently I had to look up some crash data for something.
did?
I honestly can't remember what it was for.
Yeah,
I don't know if RIDOT here has what I had available to me up in Vermont, was we had what was called route logs. And it was for every sort of state designated highway, they had little boxes. An empty box was a crash, a black box was a fatality. So you could tell, essentially based on the number of black boxes, where the areas were that you could focus on, that actually the state would get behind you, because anytime there was a black box, it got the state's attention. But at least you could also see the number of incidents. So, I know what I was looking at was, up off Child, the intersection where
Long Lane.
people end up in the front yard of the, yeah. Thank
Long
you.
Lane and
Yeah.
Charles Street.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's,
I was looking at crash
The
data
choke
for that
point.
area. Yeah.
so, yeah. Yeah,
Long Lane, sorry, that is ultimately planned route for the bike path across from where it hits Long Lane up to meet where it begins on Old Farm Road.
oh, through Swansea or,
Yeah, and the Swansea part's been done for years, but, plan is to put a light at that intersection. Want to make sure it's in it's in the comp plan, so forth, because otherwise it'll take 20 years anyway, but maybe.
right.
If it's somewhere mentioned.
Yeah, you may want to, I would definitely include that in this part, the fact that there is going to need to be a light there. I mean, there should probably be a light there already.
Yeah, Charles is looking
Yeah.
for this.
Comes up from a blind hill. I mean, I know it full well,
There'd probably be-
bicycle and car,
There'd probably be a few black boxes at that intersection.
I would imagine so. I'd like to, so we have done the schedule for adoption, the comprehensive. I would like to move on if we could. First of all, I'd like to take a vote on moving that transportation piece forward. As
I'll move
draft. Okay, Mike, and second,
Second.
Brett, all in favor? Aye.
I do have a comment. Global, as I look at the schedule for adoption, I mean, the word that comes to mind is it's aggressive. I mean, there's just so many moving parts, there's so many different sections, and I guess a question that I have is how are we going to, as we have these public hearings, I know we're trying to vet as much as possible along the way, but I find it challenging when I get 20 attachments on an email, and then I have to figure out under additional implementation actions where this fits in and all that sort of thing. So I know when we're developing a new document in my line of work, we'll have like a spreadsheet that will say, comment this against this, section. We already have like, our policies identified. And then there's kind of an adjudication of reject, accept, revise, whatever. So I guess I'm just curious, in an effort to honor our time and honor the people who input things.
I hear you. Yeah,
Like,
I mean,
so
I
to
think,
track me-
again, I think, that 20 documents was daunting. So what you're saying is you're looking for, if we're going to meet the schedule that you're going to need, and you believe, and I agree that you want a more detailed explanation of what it is you're receiving, and the action expected.
Well, I'm talking about specifically as we develop the comp plan. So let me take that additional actions. There's, I don't know, 30 things here, and they are their comments against the different draft sections that we put together. And so I think matching, we could, I'm just throwing this out there, as we solicit input from the community, there could be like a template or something like that, that they have a comment against AHC3, then they put that there. And then when we as a body get together to discuss it, we could say AH3, we all agree to reject, right? We all agree to approve or whatever. And it would just,
Well, that would be an ideal situation, but I gotta tell you, the idea of getting it in writing is rare. I mean, Davidson's very good about putting things in writing, but most of what we get in here is in a meeting, and that's, I'm relatively, I'm sorry, what? Yeah, they are. But it's also, that's the opportunity, the interaction live is where we get that chance. Now, I mean, in terms of moving it forward, my feeling is now we're pretty well along.
So maybe when we put together the full, I'm just trying to think, to make it easier, so you don't have to go through all of the content again, just having almost like a summary sheet of, like I can do a track changes summary sheet, so you're only seeing like a printout of those potential changes that you need to review and decide on, would that help as far as, like, say statewide planning gives comments back on our draft elements, and then I will try to address those changes in the document showing track changes, and then I can provide the planning board and this be a public document showing those changes in a, just a summary sheet of, it'll show the exact language, but it's not, you don't have to go through 100 pages to find those.
So if I can offer, sorry to interrupt.
Mhm.
From the standpoint where you are right now, it's going to be hard to put together what you did based on what's already been acted upon, or what, in other words, past meetings that you've had. But I think that as you get to the point where you're done with your particular sections, it's sort of your starting point. So so in essence, what you're doing is you're prepping yourself for the public hearing process and any comments that come back from the state. So I think it is fair to have a working document. I think tracking changes is extremely important from the standpoint of where the draft go, so you have called the line in the sand. You've got a section that's going to go off to the state. So from tonight forward, I'll just use transportation as a, for instance, the transportation element's going off to the state. So you're going to make the one change that we did on the transportation element. That's where we're starting. Any change that the state comes forward with, you've got to track those changes in the red line. When we engage in the public hearing process, similarly, I think what's fair of this group when you have your public hearing is to say, hey, members of the public, when you come up, we want you to be specific. So tell us what page you're on, tell us what line you're on, so that we know where you're, and if they have, Davison's good because he'll tell you exactly where he wants to make the change, but you are going to get some people that are going to come up verbally and say, I'm not sure what the plan says, but I want it to say this. So fair enough, Haley's going to catch that in the minutes, but what the job is going to be is to show that in a red line track as we go forward in terms of what changes were made, so that you can, that yes, that can go with it. Correct. Correct, but that's the benefit of doing it in the red line format, is that you can add the comment into the red line.
Spreadsheet where they can see what people comment, I don't sit there. Oh, this is what they do.
Right.
And I go, I will search
Right, there- Right, there are 50 ways to skin the cat on this. So the point being is that I'm agreeing that we should have some level of tracking from that standpoint, so that ultimately what you deal with and throw off to the council, because you may not agree with it, with the change that somebody recommends. And so essentially what's going to happen is that person's going to show up at the council and say, planning board didn't take my comment, but I really want this to put in the plan.
Right.
So you have the ability to say what you did, what you didn't do with regard to the plan. The property owner, whoever, has the ability to see whether it was in or not. And then Allison, most importantly, knows what's going to be in the plan or not. So as we get through this aggressive calendar, you're going to be able to see and understand what you're getting at.
Well, I
Because that
think
is going to
we're
be critical.
I think we're going to be in a much better place once, now that I mean, this has taken us a long time
Right.
to get here. I mean, literally over a decade. And the point now is for and it's been very open and freewheeling. And now we're saying it's got to be tighter. And if you're going to comment on it, you've got to comment very specifically on it, because
And I agree with that. You got to track.
right, because we can't be spending time looking at something and saying, well, that's a nice thing, but what do you mean by that? Because it's got to be. So anyway, I think we're all in agreement. I think this is, we want it tracked. We want it understood what changes are being recommended, if they are relevant, and if they're not relevant, it's, this doesn't fit in this either document or in this element.
Because in one community, in one community that I've worked for, Norwich, Vermont, we had Saturday public hearings to deal with our town plan. And we had times where there were 100 people in the room providing individual comment throughout, and it wasn't all the same theme from that standpoint. And I was the one responsible for basically tracking those changes and making sure that what we did or not. So I've been in that forum before where we're it's like, I have to know by the end of that public hearing, at least what the comments were. And then I had to know 3 weeks after that, when everything is worn out of your brain, what was said, so that I knew where the plan stood. And that was critical in terms of the passing of the baton from the planning board to the town council.
And in your previous life, you were in another forum with lions. I was.
Right. But yeah, I get exactly what you're saying.
So is it critical, just a question on that, I know you said there's 1,000 ways to skin the cat, concur with that. When I look at three elements that we've discussed thus far tonight, transportation and historic have a similar format that I would argue is traceable. AHC 22 on economic development doesn't have any of that. So should we adopt a common format?
No, that is the point. The economic development doesn't have the format. The other two are the official format that we have to do. And so what that discussion that we had was actually in
There's more
Allison,
coming for economic.
we've got,
It's just-
that's got to.
I thought we just voted it. to-
Oh, not economic development. No,
Oh.
that's not ready. It's just rough draft form, content still being developed, so it will look
Is that
like
Yeah,
the
and they'll all
others.
look the same.
after,
in-
you'll get
in
that back
terms of
next month,
format.
after we get more comments.
Um,
on it.
I'd like to move on. Attorney Cox has been waiting patiently and on the clock, I would imagine.
You're all caught up.
Yes. Shall I get you a sword and shield so that you can go into the forum with our planner? I think we could move on to the administrative subdivision that this was a proposal that was put forward. As an administrative subdivision, Herb handled it, and what he has made decisions, and so he's bringing it to us, the planning board, because the nature of our town, unlike some other towns, requires that the planning board review the decision before it's finalized.
Not the decision,
The
completeness,
the
classification. of
the
completeness.
classification of completeness of the application. So everybody received this one. This is the Long Lane, 74 Long Lane, and I'll let you take it, Herb, because that was your certificate.
Right, so in essence, this is the first community that I've ever had to be double checked on certifying an application complete. It's in your regulations. And that is that anytime there's an application that is going through certificate of completeness, you folks actually have the right to say that there's an error or that there's something additional that may be required of it, including the classification, whether that be administrative, minor, or major. So essentially and I did not realize that until after I had deemed it complete and was working on a draft decision when I was going through the regs and picked up on this. So it's a little convoluted because you have not only just the certificate of completeness before you, but I had already drafted the decision from that standpoint. And the reason why you're getting the draft decision is that there were a couple deficiencies that I found in the actual application, but I wouldn't deem it incomplete because of those deficiencies. So what I did is I wrote those deficiencies up into the draft decision. My certificate of completeness refers to the decision for those notes. So that's why I had to give you the draft decision as well. So I apologize if that's somewhat confusing, but again, I'm trying to back into the paperwork and the regulation that I discovered after the fact.
So we sit like senators in the forum.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Right. Except in this
Oh,
case,
this thing-
it's
I'm
all
gonna be
gonna
in
be,
a toga before
right,
the
it's all gonna
next
be thumbs up, right? So, so the bottom line is that it's a relatively simple application. It's not the prettiest looking subdivision from that standpoint, but it does meet the test of the administrative subdivision under your classification for your subdivision regs. As a result, I met with the applicant's attorney, went through the plan. The requirements are fairly basic in terms of providing a plan and a general description of the things that are going on. So to me, that was satisfactory with the exception of a couple of those deficiencies. So essentially what I'm doing is just double checking with you folks that there's really nothing that would preclude me from moving forward with the application and as administrative. And then, I don't really want to go into the decision because it's not under your purview. If you agree with the classification of administrative, the courtesy of the applicant and the applicant's attorney are that they're respecting the fact that I'm a new employee and finding things out. I don't have the regs in my brain yet. So they are chomping at the bit to get their approval. And I know the applicant's a little bit annoyed with this. That's my fault for not being more sensitive to what the regulation says before I do my work. But I am trying to catch up as fast as I can. But in essence, it's a boundary adjustment. And I had some basic changes, which you can see in there, but to me, the application was complete when I got it, except for those minor technical deficiencies.
And I've gone over these before and I've talked to Herb about it and I have no issues with it. In fact, there had been some discussion with with Attorney Cox before the application was put in terms of what the regulations were in the town and the initial ask, and it was revised accordingly to meet the town regulations. So it's.
So just, could you tell us what the criteria are for an administrative subdivision? Just remind us. of that.
Essentially, it's for instance, in this particular case, it's moving a property line. So you're not creating essentially a new lot. per se.
creating a new
Right, you're moving a line around, making one parcel bigger and the other smaller, that sort of thing. There's another,
But within the
I think I
context of the
included it.
given zoning
so
regulations.
an administrative subdivision is by a definition in your regs is a re-subdivision of an existing lot which yields no additional lots for development and involves no creation or extension of streets. Such subdivision shall only involve adjustments of boundaries of existing lots, as a for instance. There's a couple other things in there. So basically, I was looking at your definition to make sure that it met that test.
I got it. Thank you.
Just for my education on that, so if you had, just so I get this straight, if in some theoretical situation, you had a huge lot that had a postage stamp here, was totally unbuildable, but then an administrative subdivision was granted, and then it turned it into two half-side lots, that would still fall under administrative, because we created any new lots, even though the.
But it would fit within the zoning
Right, you're
regulations.
making one
You would,
conform to the zoning because it's existing small lot.
Got it.
And the other, as long as you're not making the other one a small lot, you're making it smaller, but that it can still
fits
can
within.
serve as a buildable lot.
Thank you.
okay.
So,
Do you need a vote from us?
no, not,
I didn't think so.
just making sure you didn't give me a thumbs down. All right. Emperor's good.
Spirited. All right, well, this is illuminating. Thank you, Herb. It's a pleasure to have you on board. Your industry and your attention to detail is really appreciated. And you know, it's worth it. I think we can talk, you know, this is unusual that we've had so many items in the mailing, and we'll talk about how we can maybe better organize those in the future, because Herb did do a very good job of, you know, putting it together, you know, for us. But again, we'll work on that. So
And just to clarify, I was not being someone who tries to be fastidious and how I appreciated the long, I guess I was just saying, in light of our first topic where we're saying we're about to enter into this season of aggressive tracking and making changes.
yeah,
I'm just like, how do we officially do that and honor all the inputs that comes? That was what my
It's so invaluable to the whole system overall, just because one, you're getting the head nod, whether the citizen agrees with you or not, at least they know that they've been heard.
Right.
And secondly, you're on track and understanding what the heck is before you and where it's headed.
great.
Right.
So, motion to adjourn, and it's not even 8:30. Yeah. I've still got, it was only in that, we had it, because it's not an application before us.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't talk about it in my report, but essentially it was just to let them know that there was that.
Yeah,
and,
because I'd asked if we wanted to go into detail and, so could I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second, Ashley, all in favor? Aye. Thank you all.